Some people know school as a place where children are taken care of.
I bet he'd be glad to settle for the drainage he's got now.
That right must be extended to more and more children every day.
We didn't notice the chains slipping on. One by one, the quiet freedoms of the 1970s vanished while we were busy growing up. What did we lose when everyday joys, once effortless and unspoken, became forbidden, forgotten, or replaced? You could hear it in the slap of sneakers on pavement, the rustle of leaves under bare feet, and the fading echo of a parent yelling, "Be home by dark!" That was the rule, and often the only one. Childhood in the 1970s meant a world without hovering. Kids were out the door by morning, bikes flying down sidewalks with no helmets in sight, pockets full of rocks, marbles, or candy wrappers. There was freedom in the air, and everyone breathed it in. You could disappear into the woods behind your neighborhood, climb every tree in the park, or knock on a neighbor's door without suspicion. No GPS, no smartphones, just a sense of wonder and the expectation that you'd figure things out on your own. Scraped knees and wrong turns were part of the curriculum. It was an era when growing up meant actually going out. Now, we track children with apps, wrap them in bubble wrap, and schedule every hour of their day like a corporate employee. We say it's safer, but something got lost in that transaction. Something raw and important about risk, independence, and trust. Today's kids might have the world at their fingertips, but they'll never know the thrill of being truly lost and finding their way back before the streetlights came on. In the 1970s, music was not streamed. It was passed hand to hand, wrapped in plastic and personality. If you wanted someone to know you, really know you, you made them a mixtape. It was your heart, your taste, your weekend nights recorded onto a cassette, labeled in loopy handwriting, maybe with a little doodle in the corner. The songs were not chosen at random, they were curated. A love letter in reverse, a rebellion in tracklist form, and if you had a boombox, well, you were the DJ of your own little world, blasting your favorites at the park, by the pool, or on your front steps while friends gathered around. No earbuds, no privacy. It was communal, public, and proud. You shared music, literally. Tapes swapped between friends, rewound with a pencil when they jammed, passed around at school, duplicated in living rooms. Music lived in bedrooms, on shelves, in glove compartments. Now, everything is instant and infinite. And yet, it feels like we lost the ritual. That sense of effort, that warm hiss of analog sound. The physicality of pressing record and hoping your brother did not walk in talking while your favorite song played on the radio. Today's playlists may be convenient, but they are missing the fingerprints, the memories, the awkward pauses and joy of discovering someone else's world, one track at a time. A giant screen under the stars, the crackle of a tinny speaker hanging from your car window, the smell of popcorn, engine exhaust, and summer sweat. If you were lucky enough to grow up in the 1970s, drive-in theaters were your ticket to freedom. $5 for a night out, a movie, and maybe even a first kiss. Families packed into station wagons with lawn chairs and blankets. Teenagers showed up in Mustangs and Chevelles trying to act like James Dean. No one cared if you wore pajamas or brought your own snacks. It was casual magic. A patch of gravel turned into an oasis of glowing screens and shared laughter. And when the second feature came on and the kids were asleep in the back seat, parents finally got a little peace. The whole experience was slow, dreamy, and entirely unlike anything we have today. Today's theaters are cramped and overpriced. Streaming has replaced the ritual. But back then, watching a movie meant being together. There was no pausing, no rewinding. Just you, the screen, and whoever was sitting beside you. The sounds of crickets and car horns mixed with dialogue, and it all felt okay. Now, drive-ins are a fading relic, abandoned lots with crumbling screens and silence where community once lived. How did something so ordinary feel so perfect and become so rare? Once upon a time, thumbing a ride was just another way to get around. You stuck out your arm, trusted a stranger, and ended up somewhere new. In the 1970s, hitchhiking was woven into the fabric of American youth culture. It was impulsive, bold, and strangely ordinary. Backpackers with handwritten cardboard signs, college students heading home for the weekend, young dreamers chasing concerts, freedom, or just a place to sleep that night. The road was a friend, not a threat. Of course, it came with risk, but so did living. Trust was the currency of the era. You paid with eye contact, conversation, and the silent agreement that we were all just trying to get somewhere. Today, the idea seems reckless, dangerous, unthinkable. Our paranoia has grown louder than our sense of community. Stories of harm and headlines of fear took the wheel, and the open road became a closed door. But ask anyone who stuck out their thumb back then, and they will tell you about the kindness of strangers, the rides that turned into friendships, and the way the world felt a little more connected. Hitchhiking was not just transportation. It was a dare, a freedom, and a story you told for the rest of your life. Before SoundCloud, before YouTube, before social media fame, there were bedrooms turned studios and dreams pressed onto tape. In the 1970s, if you had a cheap mic, a boom box, and a couple of blank cassettes, you could become something. Underground music was not a genre, it was a movement. Punk bands recorded in basements. Folk singers mailed demos to friends. Zines spread word of new voices and sounds through mailboxes, not algorithms. There were no managers, no marketing plans, just talent, grit, and a belief that someone, somewhere, wanted to hear you. People hand-dubbed copies of their music and passed them around at shows or sold them at school. Every tape had hiss, glitches, and personality. The packaging? Handwritten. Maybe a photo glued to the cover. You could feel the artist's fingerprints on every inch. It was imperfect, but it was real. Today, we are flooded with polished perfection. Back then, it was about raw expression. You made art because you had to, not because you hoped to trend. The cassette culture was not just a medium. It was a rebellion, a community, a fight for authenticity in a world that was starting to get a little too glossy. And maybe that fight is worth remembering. The echo of wheels on polished floors, the scent of popcorn and sweat and disco, neon lights bouncing off mirrored balls. In the 1970s, roller rinks were not just hangout spots, they were kingdoms, and your skates were your crown. Friday night meant meeting your friends, lacing up, and entering a world where rhythm ruled. You danced on wheels, you fell, laughed, and got back up. There were couples-only skates, awkward slow songs, and bathroom mirrors filled with clouded hairspray. Everyone had a favorite song, a favorite move, and maybe someone they hoped would notice them under the flashing lights. Outside, the world was growing fast, politics, pressure, and bills. But inside the rink, time paused. Skateboarding had its own revolution. Empty swimming pools turned into canvases. Suburbs became skate parks. Kids carved out space for themselves, literally, where none existed, and no one asked permission. Today, skating exists, but it is not the heartbeat it once was. The culture is fractured, the space is fewer. But once, it was everything. It was freedom on four wheels. It was belonging without needing to say a word. Do you remember the feeling of flying just for a minute on a stretch of waxed floor with the music loud and the world far away? One click, a soft whir. Then, the quiet magic of an image developing in your hand. In the 1970s, Polaroid cameras were revolutionary. For the first time, anyone could take a picture and see it immediately. No darkroom, no waiting. Just you, your moment, and proof it really happened. Families passed around fresh photos like treasure. Kids waited breathlessly for the image to appear. Lovers captured Sunday mornings. Friends documented wild nights. There was something deeply personal about holding your memories before they were even dry. And no filters, no edits, just reality, messy, beautiful, and real. Polaroids were pinned to bulletin boards, slid into wallets, taped to fridges. They lived with you. They aged with you. They meant something. Today, we have endless images, but none of them feel quite as permanent or precious. With Polaroids, every shot counted. Every frame had weight, and maybe that is what we miss most. Not just the photo, but the feeling that moments matter. It is easy to forget, but there was a time when the scent of smoke lingered in every diner booth, airport lounge, and grocery store checkout line. In the 1970s, smoking was not just allowed, it was expected. Businessmen lit up during meetings. Teenagers passed cigarettes behind school gyms. Ashtrays were on every table, every dashboard, every teacher's desk. It was part of the culture, the aesthetic, the identity. Movie stars smoked, politicians smoked. Your parents probably did too. No one flinched. No one asked you to step outside. It was just part of the air. Of course, we know better now. Health campaigns, lawsuits, and personal tragedies painted a much different picture. But the freedom itself, the choice to smoke when and where you pleased, that was real. It was tied to personal liberty, to adulthood, to rebellion. And when it disappeared, it did not go quietly. Today, you light a cigarette and you are met with side eyes, signage, and social judgment. We traded smoke for safety, but also for surveillance. Back then, you could light up and feel cool, in control, and slightly defiant. Maybe that is what we really miss, the ability to make a bad choice without being watched. The 1970s did not care for stiff collars or pressed slacks. It was a decade where fashion rebelled in every direction. Bell-bottoms, crop tops, denim jackets, tie-dye, flowing skirts, and no bras in sight. You could walk into a grocery store barefoot and no one would blink. Schools loosened their grip. Workplaces eased up. Suddenly, expression trumped etiquette. Clothes became loud, soft, bright, ragged, whatever you wanted them to be. Fashion was not dictated by glossy ads. It was discovered at thrift stores, passed down from older siblings, or made at home with scissors and hope. There was no one look. There were thousands. Everyone seemed to be trying something. Maybe failing, but trying. It was messy, but honest, and freeing. Today we have trends, influencers, and curated closets. But back then, you wore what felt like you. No fear of judgment, no uniform to blend into, just a quiet confidence that your clothes could be loud for you. We might be more stylish now, but are we more ourselves? Nature was not an excursion. It was your backyard, your escape, your everyday. In the 1970s, kids built forts in the woods, caught frogs in creeks, and came home with dirt under every nail. You did not need a guidebook or a permit. You just went. Parents did not ask where, and you would not have known how to answer anyway. You were not trying to get grounded. You were already in the ground, climbing trees, jumping rocks, wading through poison ivy without a second thought. Nature was not a classroom. It was a kingdom. No sunscreen, no hydration plan, just freedom. Exploration was a birthright, not a weekend event, and it built something in us. Resilience, curiosity, respect. Today, access to nature feels like a luxury. Locked gates, expensive gear, screens that convince us we have seen it all. But nothing replaces the smell of wet soil after rain, the sound of wind in tall grass, the feeling that you are the only person for miles, and maybe, for a moment, you were. In 1971, a line was redrawn, not with a pen, but with a promise. The 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18, and just like that, an entire generation found its voice. These were not just young people. They were drafted soldiers, college kids dodging tear gas, teenagers watching the world split open on television. And finally, someone said, if you are old enough to die for your country, you are old enough to vote in it. The freedom hit hard. It meant something. It was a shift that crackled with urgency and anger and hope. Youth engagement exploded. Political debates moved into high schools. Campaign buttons were pinned next to denim patches and peace signs. And for once, the future was not just talked about. It was shaped by those who would live it. Fast forward to now, and voting feels like a chore to some, a broken system to others. But back then, it was power. It was a statement. It was yours. We forget that this right was not handed down gently. It was fought for, protested for, demanded. And when it finally came, it did not just change ballots. It changed how a generation saw itself. 18 used to mean something more than college applications and student loans. It meant change. It meant your voice finally counted. What happened to that fire? In the 1970s, something fierce woke up in America, and it was not going back to sleep. The women's liberation movement roared into the public eye with a force that rattled everything from beauty pageants to boardrooms. It was not just about equal pay, though that mattered. It was not just about reproductive rights, though that was urgent. It was about freedom. Freedom from silence, from second place, from being told what to wear, how to think, and who to be. Feminist voices flooded magazines, television shows, courtrooms, and classrooms. Gloria Steinem stood beside factory workers. College students marched with mothers. Women walked out of jobs, out of marriages, and into the streets demanding more. It was not always polite, and it was never perfect, but it was necessary. Today, we say empowerment like it is a lifestyle brand. Back then, it was a revolution. You felt it in your shoes when you walked into work for the first time with no man above you. You felt it when you bought your own home, made your own decisions, or chose not to have children, and nobody could stop you. The world had never seen women that loud, that confident, that unapologetic. And somewhere along the way, some of that urgency faded. Rights gained are not rights guaranteed. What they fought for was not comfort, it was change. And it came at a cost. Are we still willing to pay it? The air was getting thick, the rivers were burning, and for once, the country looked up and realized something was wrong. The 1970s became a turning point for environmental consciousness, not because it was trendy, but because it was terrifying. Factories dumped poison without question. Cars coughed black smoke. Plastic began to invade every corner of life. In 1970, the first Earth Day was held. Millions of Americans, students, teachers, parents, gathered not to celebrate the planet, but to save it. It was not a party. It was a wake-up call. Politicians had no choice but to listen. Out of that noise came real change. The Clean Air Act, the Endangered Species Act, and the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. For the first time, people fought for trees like they fought for their rights. School children planted gardens. Teenagers wrote letters to Congress. Whole towns showed up to clean their rivers and shut down their polluters. It was messy, and it mattered. Now, the climate crisis screams louder than ever, and yet the urgency feels quieter. Corporate pledges and green branding replaced the dirty hands and loud voices. Back then, they did not wait for a policy. They protested, they pushed, they acted, and they left behind a blueprint, one that we seem to have folded up and left in a drawer. Will we ever get that spark back? The 1960s cracked the door open. The 1970s pushed it wider. Civil rights were no longer just a dream. They were an expectation. But the struggle did not end with a speech or a signature. In cities and towns across America, Black communities kept fighting for equality in housing, education, and opportunity. Laws changed, but hearts were slower. Segregation became illegal, but racism did not vanish. That is where the real work began. The 1970s were not about starting the fight. They were about sustaining it. Affirmative action programs opened college doors. Lawsuits demanded fairness in hiring. Black-owned businesses emerged with pride and resilience. Cultural movements like Black is Beautiful redefined identity. It was more than politics. It was pride. It was people carving space for themselves in a country that still flinched at their presence. We talk about progress now as if it is inevitable. But back then, every inch was earned. Through marches, through lawsuits, through pain. The gains of that era were not just legal, they were spiritual. They said, "We belong here. We always have." Today, we stand on the shoulders of those who kept going when the spotlight faded. But are we still moving forward? Or just remembering what others bled for? Stonewall was the spark. The 1970s lit the fire. Across the United States, LGBTQ+ people stepped out of the shadows and into the streets, refusing to apologize for who they were. Pride parades began as protests, loud, angry, beautiful. People marched with signs that said, "I am gay and proud." That sentence alone could cost you your job, your family, your safety. But they said it anyway. Activists formed community centers, support groups, and newsletters typed by hand and mailed in secret. Safe spaces were built from scratch. Bars became sanctuaries. And for the first time, people could find each other and themselves. The language was still new. The risks were high, but so was the courage. Today, rainbow flags fly on corporate logos and politicians tweet support. But back then, it was not performative. It was life or death. Coming out was not an Instagram post. It was a risk that could shatter everything. And still, they came out. They built a movement that dared to say, love is not wrong. Identity is not a crime. Now, as rights are questioned once again, and hate creeps back in disguised as law, we have to ask, are we honoring their fight or just quoting it? The press was not always polite, but in the 1970s, it was powerful. Reporters cracked open stories that politicians prayed would stay buried. Watergate did not just take down a president, it reminded the world what journalism could do. Investigative journalists became household names, not because they courted fame, but because they chased truth. Late-night meetings in parking garages, whistleblowers, tape recordings, everything unraveling piece by piece on the front page of a newspaper. The public waited for the morning edition like it was a lifeline. News was not entertainment, it was a civic duty, and it was respected, even when it was uncomfortable, especially then. Today, we scroll, we skim, we argue, but we rarely trust. Journalism is under attack, and not just from critics, from apathy, from noise, from the sense that facts are up for debate. But in the 1970s, reporters believed their job could save the country. And sometimes it did. We talk a lot about fake news now, but what happens when the real stuff stops getting made? The streets were alive in the 1970s. You could hear it in the chants, feel it in the cardboard signs, see it in the faces of people who had nothing left to lose and everything to demand. Protests were not planned for Instagram likes. They were organized with flyers, phone trees, and word of mouth. Anti-war, anti-nuclear, pro-equality, pro-choice. The causes were different, but the energy was the same. We will be heard. Teenagers stood next to grandmothers. Vietnam veterans marched beside draft dodgers. It was messy, raw, and wildly democratic. Sometimes it ended in song, sometimes in tear gas, but always in movement. Today, the word protest gets watered down or weaponized. But back then, it meant action. Bodies in the street, voices on megaphones, the risk of arrest, the risk of being ignored. But they went anyway. They did not wait for someone else to make the world better. They did it themselves, on sidewalks and campuses and Capitol steps. Have we lost that urgency, or just traded it for hashtags? Long before podcasts and playlists, community radio was the sound of local life. In the 1970s, tiny stations with even tinier budgets gave a microphone to the people, all the people. Music that never made the top 40, voices that never got national airtime, stories that mattered to your block, your town, your moment. Volunteers ran the shows. DJs played records brought from home. News was read live. Mistakes were unedited. It was raw, real, and completely human. You could hear a neighbor's voice at breakfast, discover a new band at midnight. Community radio was not about ratings. It was about connection, and it sounded like freedom. There were no corporate sponsors breathing down your neck, no algorithms, no committee approvals. Just a mic, a signal, and a sense of purpose. Now, most stations are owned by conglomerates. Same playlists, same opinions, same voices. But community radio used to remind us that everyone had something worth hearing. When was the last time you listened? Turn the dial and suddenly, your neighbor was on television. In the 1970s, public access TV gave ordinary people a platform with extraordinary possibilities. You did not need Hollywood. You did not need a network. You needed a camera, an idea, and the nerve to say something. From knitting tutorials to political rants, public access shows were weird, wonderful, and wildly democratic. Anyone could make a show. Everyone had something to say. It was not about profit. It was about expression. People explored art, faith, culture, identity. They filmed in basements, garages, and community centers. Some shows were terrible. Some were genius. But all of them were honest. That kind of creative freedom is hard to find now. We stream, we scroll, we like. But public access was different. It gave power to the people, unedited, uncensored, and often unhinged. It was a little messy and completely beautiful. What would we hear today if every voice still had a chance to broadcast? You could work a summer job and pay for college. That was not a myth in the 1970s. It was reality. Tuition at public universities was low, sometimes even free. Student debt was not a lifelong sentence. Higher education was a ladder you could actually climb. First-generation students walked onto campus with nothing but drive. Veterans returned from war and found classrooms waiting. Immigrants sent their children with pride. The American dream wore a cap and gown. And no one talked about six-figure loans or compound interest. College was a path, not a trap. Today, we ask 18-year-olds to gamble their futures on tens of thousands of dollars. And then we wonder why they hesitate. Back then, education was seen as a public good, not a private product. Investing in minds was investing in the country. That idea feels distant now, but it was not so long ago. What changed? And can we change it back? Driving in the 1970s was not just transportation, it was a skill. You felt the road in your hands and feet. Manual transmissions were everywhere, and automatic was something fancy or foreign. You had to know when to shift, how to handle a clutch, when to ease off the gas or floor it. There was no digital nanny hovering over your shoulder, no automatic lane assist, no AI keeping you between the lines. Just you, the wheel, and the rhythm of the road. Buttons and knobs were physical. You could feel your way through them in the dark. Roll down your window, you used your arm, adjust your seat, pull the lever. If the car broke, you opened the hood and took a look, or your uncle did. Everything was simpler, more mechanical, more human. Today's cars feel like rolling smartphones, clean, efficient, and distant. They beep if you drift, chirp if you forget your seatbelt, flash warnings if you dare to be less than perfect. But back then, the car was yours. And it was honest. No screens, no software updates. Just a roar, a grind, and the open road. We have gained convenience, but maybe we lost the joy of really driving. The 1970s had machines, but not the kind that ruled your life. Technology was in the background, not your best friend or your boss. You used a rotary phone to make a call, and if no one picked up, you tried again later. There were no notifications to chase, no scrolling until midnight, no invisible thread tugging at your focus. A television had knobs, not remotes. A computer, if you had ever even seen one, was locked in a lab or a government office. At home, entertainment was tactile. You played cards, you built things, you went outside. Time stretched in ways we can barely remember. A weekend felt like a weekend. Not another chance to catch up on everything the internet says you missed. Social plans were real. If someone showed up late, you waited. If they canceled, they called your house. The space between people was not filled with constant noise. It was filled with actual presence. Now, we carry our stress in our pockets and wear our exhaustion like a badge. But back then, quiet was not scary. It was normal. And in that space, people found room to think, to feel, to be. Maybe that is the freedom we miss most. Not the gadgets we did not have, but the pressure we did not feel. No one knew your search history. No one tracked your steps. The only cookies in your life were in the kitchen. In the 1970s, privacy was not a privilege. It was the default. You could walk into a bookstore, buy a strange novel, and no algorithm followed you for the rest of your life. Your mailbox was sacred. Your phone calls disappeared into the air. If someone wanted to spy on you, they had to actually follow you. That kind of effort acted like a natural barrier. Most people were too busy living to worry about what you were doing. There were no background trackers, no data brokers, no terms of service hidden behind walls of legal jargon. What you shared stayed between you and the person you trusted, not some invisible server farm halfway across the country. But now, every tap, every click, every whisper into your microphone is logged, tracked, and stored. They call it data. They call it personalization. But let's be honest, it is surveillance. The internet watches more than it serves. Your face is in more databases than you could name. Back then, being anonymous was not scary. It was freeing. You could make mistakes, change your mind, try something new, and no one had a record of it. There was space to grow, to shed your skin, to be human without the weight of digital memory. We used to live in a world where forgetting was possible. What happens when it no longer is? You did not need an app to shop. You needed a name. The butcher knew your order. The cashier asked about your kids. The hardware guy knew exactly what bolt you needed just by looking at it. In the 1970s, shopping was personal. You went to the corner store, the bakery, the record shop. Not because it was hip, but because it was yours. Independent businesses were everywhere, and they were more than stores. They were extensions of the community. Shopping felt like being part of a living, breathing story, where your presence actually mattered. Every errand doubled as a moment of connection, a pause in the day to talk, to laugh, to be seen. Bulletin boards were filled with lost dogs, babysitting offers, and banned flyers. You lingered, you talked, you trusted. Sure, you might pay a little more than a chain, but what you got in return was worth it. Attention, care, relationship. You did not get customer service. You got a neighbor. And then slowly, it faded. Chain stores expanded. Malls arrived. Online shopping took over. Now everything is fast, cheap, and anonymous. Convenient, yes, but hollow. We used to walk out of stores with more than groceries. We walked out with connection. And when we lost that, we lost something we did not even know we needed. Ink on paper. A name on the envelope. The slow unfolding of a letter you had waited a week to receive. Handwritten notes were more than communication. They were ritual. In the 1970s, people wrote letters like they meant it. Long ones, short ones, notes left on kitchen counters, scribbled margins in textbooks, love letters, apology letters. Everything had a weight, literally and emotionally. You could smell the paper, feel the pen marks, see the imperfections. Every note had its own heartbeat. It reminded you that someone took time, real, physical time, to sit down and reach out. There was effort in every sentence. You wrote slower, you thought more. And when you received one, it felt like a gift, not a notification, a gift stored in shoe boxes, taped to mirrors, read again and again. There was permanence to it, a sense that this mattered. Today we type fast, we delete faster. Messages evaporate, nothing sticks, nothing lingers. Our words are everywhere and somehow mean less. But when someone sat down, pulled out paper and wrote just for you, that was intimacy. That was care. In a world obsessed with speed, maybe the slowest way to say something is still the most honest. If you were a kid in the 1980s, there were two ways to rebel. You could get grounded or you could collect Garbage Pail Kids. What started as a gross-out parody of wholesome Cabbage Patch Kids quickly mutated into one of the most controversial and overstimulating franchises of the decade. The trading cards were wild enough, oozing noses, melting eyeballs, radioactive vomit. But that was just the beginning. Suddenly, they were everywhere. Garbage Pail Kids lunchboxes, bed sheets, pajamas, notebooks, puzzles, even Halloween costumes. It was like someone said, "What if childhood was more disgusting?" And the market responded, "Yes, please." Parents hated them. Teachers banned them. Some schools even confiscated them on site. But for kids, they were pure rebellion in sticker form. Every new pack was a gamble. Would you get Atom Bomb or Leaky Lindsay? Either way, it was peak 1980s absurdity, but the brand overdid it. What once felt underground became overexposed, and by the time the infamous Garbage Pail Kids movie dropped in theaters, it was game over. Gross became exhausting. The merch wave collapsed under its own snot-covered weight. Still, it was fun while it lasted. Now, let us talk about another trend that looked sweet and innocent, until summer arrived and your feet begged for mercy. The hand crank egg beater was a rite of passage. Long before mixers plugged into walls, children stood on stools beside their mothers, gripping the cool metal handle and turning the crank with both hands. The beaters would spin in a blur, blending sugar, eggs, and flour into the thick beginnings of birthday cakes and pancake batter. It was not efficient, but it was intimate. You felt the recipe coming together. Your arms grew sore, but your heart grew full. The egg beater did not make noise. It did not break. It did not ask for anything but effort. Every kitchen had one, usually tucked in a drawer next to the wooden spoons and measuring cups. Its clinking metal gears were as familiar as the smell of vanilla extract. And somehow, everything tasted better when it had been beaten by hand. Then came stand mixers, food processors, and digital timers. The crank beater was cast aside as outdated, inconvenient, old. But in that loss, something human disappeared. Now it hangs on antique shop walls, a symbol of effort, patience, and care. It taught us that food was not just made, it was earned. Why did we stop believing that some things are better when you feel them in your bones? The flea market at the county fairgrounds was not just an event. It was an ecosystem. Hot pavement under your feet, the smell of popcorn mixing with motor oil, and a wall of voices haggling like they were at a medieval bazaar. Dad had a game plan. He always did. First, a lap to scout. Then back around to make the real choices. You wandered behind him wide-eyed, marveling at tables full of license plates, rusted tools, vintage comic books, and a surprising amount of questionable homemade jerky. One guy sold nothing but bumper stickers with sayings that would get you sent to the principal's office. Another had rows of toy yo-yos. And even though Dad warned you, you begged for one anyway. It broke in 5 minutes, maybe 6, but you still carried it around like it was gold. There was always a booth with used records blaring classic rock through dusty speakers, and Dad would flip through the crates like he was searching for buried treasure. Every once in a while, he would hold one up and say, "Now this is music." You did not argue. Not when he looked that happy. And if you thought flea markets were a lawless land of loose change and sunburns, just wait until you hear about the go-kart track that somehow never got shut down. Mood rings promised to read your soul. Slip one on, and suddenly your finger was a window into your emotions. Or so we thought. The magic came from a tiny, color-changing stone set into a thick metal or plastic band. It shifted hues depending on temperature, but as kids, we believed it told the truth. If it turned blue, you were calm. If it went black, you were angry. Green? Maybe in love. We studied those little charts that came with the ring like they were sacred scrolls. Every recess and sleepover had at least one person interpreting moods. Sure, the science was sketchy, and sure, it mostly just reflected how cold or hot your hands were, but to us, it was real magic. It felt like the ring knew something we did not. Every kid had one, lost one, or begged their parents to buy one from a gas station or gift shop. The band turned your finger green eventually, but you wore it anyway. It was a talisman, a tiny crystal mood detector that let you feel seen, even if it was just a gimmick. To this day, nothing quite compares to the mystery and wonder packed into one shimmering, shifting little stone. If the lights went out in the 1980s, chances are something in your room lit up. Glow-in-the-dark stickers were slapped on every surface known to humankind. Bedroom ceilings became constellations. Alarm clocks glowed like miniature UFOs. Light switch covers, shoelaces, trapper keepers, even toothbrushes. Nothing was safe from the radioactive green charm of phosphorescent novelty. And as a kid, it was magic. You charged them up under a lamp, turned off the lights, and suddenly your room was a planetarium. Sort of. The glow would last about 30 seconds. And then, nothing. But those 30 seconds? Pure wonder. The problem came when the adhesive gave out and the stickers peeled off, leaving weird, dusty outlines on your walls. Or when the glow effect faded completely, leaving behind little blobs of dead plastic. Still, the trend exploded. Kids wanted to glow. Toys were made with it. T-shirts were printed with it. Some even tried to make glow-in-the-dark nail polish. The 80s loved the idea of visibility, especially in the dark. But while glowing stars were subtle, the next trend was anything but. Let us talk about the fashion moment that made teenagers look like they were headed straight for the football field. Shoulder pads, anyone? The O'Keefe and Merritt Aristocrat range was not just a stove, it was a throne. Towering over every other appliance in the room, this 734-pound marvel was the ultimate status symbol in post-war kitchens. It did not whisper innovation, it shouted it. With twin ovens, broilers, warming drawers, and a built-in timer clock, it looked like something from a science fiction movie, only real. Housewives of the 1940s and 1950s dreamed of owning one. Advertisements called it the Cadillac of kitchen ranges, and they were not exaggerating. You could roast a turkey, bake a pie, broil steaks, and warm dinner rolls at the same time. It was massive, yes, but that size came with function. Wide enamel cooktops offered space for every pot and pan. The dials were thick, confident, and satisfying to turn. It felt like driving a classic car, slow, powerful, and designed to last forever. But time moves fast. Kitchens shrank. Stainless steel arrived. And the Aristocrat, once a dream, became too heavy, too large, too old-fashioned. Most were discarded during remodels, sold for scrap or left in garages like relics from a forgotten empire. But ask anyone who grew up with one, and they will tell you that stove made cooking feel like a ceremony. When did we decide that smaller meant better? Some nights, it was the backyard. Other times, it was the town planetarium where the air smelled like metal seats and carpet glue. But either way, Dad made sure you always looked up. He would point at a blinking light in the sky and say something like, "That one's Venus," even if it was just an airplane. You believed him, because he said it with the same certainty he used when fixing the lawnmower. Sometimes he would bring out a telescope that never quite focused right, but it did not matter. You could see the moon, or at least a very bright blur that had to be the moon, and that was enough. He told you about constellations, meteor showers, and a comet he swore he saw when he was 12. The planetarium nights were just as magical. You would lean back in those creaky seats while the ceiling lit up with galaxies and a deep voice narrated the birth of stars. Dad would whisper facts like he had a PhD in astronomy, even if he probably read them from the brochure 5 minutes before. You did not go to learn. You went to dream. And the only thing better than dreaming about space? Digging through the universe of stuff at the local flea market the very next weekend. The kitchen of the 1970s did not just serve food, it made a statement. And that statement was harvest gold and avocado green. These two colors dominated every American kitchen appliance. Your refrigerator, your stove, even your blender wore these colors like a uniform. It was not just paint, it was identity. These colors were supposed to represent nature, health, and a touch of luxury. Harvest gold had a warm golden glow that felt like sunlight. Avocado green was earthy and bold, a perfect match for the indoor plant movement and natural fiber craze of the time. But somewhere along the way, the trend turned into a punchline. Yet, for those who lived it, there is no forgetting. You remember the heavy click of the fridge door, the way the green surface reflected your face in the oven window, the hum of the blender making root beer floats. These were not sleek or modern. They were sturdy, reliable, and filled with the smells of Sunday dinners and burnt toast. Maybe you were not fond of these colors as a kid. Maybe you even hated them. But when you see them now, something deep inside stirs. They are more than colors. They are the palette of your childhood. The Trapper Keeper was not just a binder, it was a lifestyle. This glorious slab of plastic with vibrant covers, think unicorns, neon grids, or random geometric chaos, was the crown jewel of any school supply list in the 1980s. But what really made it iconic? That Velcro closure. The loud, slow rip of peeling open your binder was like a thunderclap in homeroom. One kid opened theirs? Fine. 20 kids did it at once? It sounded like the floor was being ripped up. Teachers hated it. Students loved it. The inside was perfectly organized with color-coded folders, pockets for notes, and room for a calculator or 3-scented pens. But the noise? That was the deal breaker. Eventually, some schools banned them altogether, citing disruption of learning, which is code for "this binder is louder than the morning announcements." But let us be honest, part of the appeal was the noise. It said, "I am prepared and I am here to cause mild chaos." The Trapper Keeper burned bright, and then it was gone. But if you were not cradling one of these masterpieces, you were probably outside spinning on something equally unnecessary and questionably effective. Let us talk about the portable dance revolution that was basically just fancy cardboard. The Cold Spot refrigerator was not just an appliance, it was the promise of a modern American life, humming quietly behind a steel door. Born in 1928 and sold by Sears for nearly 50 years, it was as dependable as it was beautiful. But in 1935, the Cold Spot became something extraordinary. That year, legendary designer Raymond Loewy transformed it into a sleek, curved monument to the future. Gone were the clunky bolts and exposed hinges. In their place, smooth lines, minimal handles, and a shape that looked more like a Cadillac fender than a food locker. It was the first refrigerator to look good in the spotlight, not just behind the scenes. Inside, it had adjustable shelves, crisper drawers, and butter compartments, all luxuries at the time. It was quiet, reliable, and built to last for decades. Families placed cherished leftovers in its embrace. Birthday cakes, cold fried chicken, pitchers of lemonade. This was where comfort lived. And yet, the Cold Spot's legacy faded as mass manufacturing favored cheaper materials and disposable models. The beauty disappeared. The silence was replaced with buzz and blinking lights, and the promise of forever was swapped for one-year warranties. When did we decide that cold convenience was more important than warm design? It was not advertised. It was not even on a main road. Just a crooked wooden sign and a driveway that dipped behind an overgrown hedge. But if Dad tapped the wheel twice and said, "Here we are," you knew it was magic. The model train store in the back of someone's garage was no bigger than a single-car stall, but inside, it felt like a kingdom. Shelves were packed to the rafters with tiny train cars, tracks, tunnels, even tiny trees with even tinier squirrels. The air smelled like dust and old metal, the kind of smell that never leaves your coat. You would lean in to watch the train circle a miniature mountain range while Dad made small talk with the gray-haired man in suspenders, who clearly ran the whole operation on nothing but love and nostalgia. "This one's from 1952, the man would say, handing Dad a coal car like it was a rare coin. You did not know what made it special. You just knew Dad's eyes lit up in that way he saved for fishing trips and baseball games. It was not just a store. It was a secret clubhouse for grown men who still believed in toy engines and pretend towns. And if you think that was charming, wait until you smell what comes next. Free popcorn at the furniture store. If you remember Clacker Toys, you probably also remember getting smacked in the face. These were two solid acrylic balls connected by a string, meant to be swung up and down until they clacked together above and below your hand. That was the whole toy. No batteries, no screen. Just two hard spheres ready to leave a bruise. And kids loved them. The louder and faster they clacked, the cooler you were. It was a skill to master. Get the rhythm right, and you could keep them going for minutes. Get it wrong, and you got a nasty surprise. Parents hated them. Teachers banned them. Hospitals probably kept a few on hand just to demonstrate what not to do. They were loud, dangerous, and oddly satisfying. For a few wild years, clackers were everywhere. on sidewalks, in classrooms, and hidden under beds when they got taken away. Eventually, safety concerns shut them down, but not before a generation got their fill of noise and near misses. They were outlawed in some places, but that only made them cooler. If you ever got them moving just right, you remember the thrill, and maybe a headache to go with it. They were chaos in toy form, and we would not have had it any other way. You knew a kid was cool if their necklace made noise from down the hallway. Enter the plastic charm necklace. These things were a fashion statement and a choking hazard all rolled into one. A long, brightly colored chain that you decked out with dozens of plastic trinkets. Mini roller skates, tiny telephones, hair dryers, soda bottles, and anything else the size of your thumb. The more charms, the better. It was like curating your own loud, clunky resume of childhood interests. Everyone traded them. Everyone bragged about having the rare ones. And of course, the plastic was cheap enough to snap if you breathed on it wrong. Teachers hated them. Parents hated stepping on them. But kids loved how collectible they felt. That is, until the day you leaned over your desk and your entire charm empire dumped itself on the floor like a sad little toy avalanche. Still, for a while, they were the perfect combination of fashion and fun. And speaking of things that looked fun but failed to function properly, do you remember the sweet-smelling school supply that never actually worked? Let us talk about rubber-scented erasers shaped like food. The butter mold was once a quiet symbol of pride that lived in farmhouse kitchens and rural homes across the country. Before butter came in sticks wrapped in wax paper and stacked in supermarket coolers, it was made by hand, from cream churned for what felt like hours. But churning was only half the ritual. The real finish came when that butter, thick, golden, and soft, was pressed into a hand-carved wooden mold. These molds came in all shapes and designs: roses, wheat stalks, stars, initials. Some were simple, some were intricate, but all of them said the same thing. This was made with care. They were not just decorative, they were a mark of identity. In local markets and community fairs, families were recognized by their unique butter stamps. It was not branding, it was heritage, a kind of craftsmanship that was passed down like a recipe. Butter molds were rinsed, dried, and stored in the coolest cupboard. They were cleaned with a toothbrush, handled like treasure. Today, you will find them dusty on antique shelves, mistaken for cookie presses or quaint kitchen decor. But they were never just for show. They were the final touch to a process that took time, patience, and love. When did we stop honoring the beauty in what we used to make by hand? Radio Shack. You did not go to Radio Shack to shop. You went there to touch. The moment you walked through the door, it was like stepping onto a spaceship. Racks of wires, batteries, and gadgets you had never even heard of. And in the middle of it all, the demo table, a flashing, beeping paradise. Dad would say, "We're just browsing," but an hour later, he was still pressing buttons, turning knobs, and pretending he was building a satellite in the garage. You would find the mini keyboard and try to play "Mary Had a Little Lamb" while he talked tech with the teenage clerk behind the counter. Every once in a while, he would point at something and say, "I had one of these back in college," even if he definitely did not. He would pick up a transistor radio, weigh it in his hand like a jeweler inspecting a rare gem, and give a long, low whistle. Solid piece of work. He never bought anything over $20, but you always walked out feeling like you had been part of a NASA mission. If imagination had a store, it was that one. And right around the corner from that tech wonderland, a pet store where you begged and somehow always walked out with something in a plastic bag. They were not just for carrying sandwiches and juice boxes. They were badges of honor. In the 1970s, metal lunchboxes with cartoon characters were everything to a kid. You marched into school like you owned the place if you had the Brady Bunch, Scooby-Doo, or Fat Albert slung over your arm. They clanged when you walked, chipped when you dropped them, and smelled like peanut butter forever. But they were yours. The thermos inside matched the design, with a plastic cup that screwed on top and often leaked just enough milk to give the lunchbox that signature sour scent. You would line them up on the windowsill during class or hide secret notes inside the lid. The paint would eventually chip, The latches would rust, but you never wanted to give it up. Today, they have been replaced by soft-sided, logo-free lunch carriers. But for those who grew up in that era, seeing one again brings back the sound of the bell, the taste of a bologna sandwich, and that magical feeling of opening your box and hoping you got a Hostess cupcake instead of raisins. They were loud, proud, and deeply personal. One glance at the dented metal, and the memories rush back like a school bell in September. The mini boombox was supposed to be the coolest thing you could clip onto your belt. A pint-sized party machine, a radio revolution in your pocket. But in reality, it was all look, no boom. These things were everywhere in the late 1980s, bright, plastic, and usually in neon colors that matched your windbreaker. They were meant to let you carry your music wherever you went, like a portable dance party. Except the sound quality was trash. The volume was barely louder than a whisper. If you were outside, forget it. Wind was louder. And the tape deck? Constantly ate your favorite cassette, if it even had a tape deck. A lot of them were just FM radios disguised as full-function players. But hey, they looked cool. They had fake speakers, shiny knobs, and some even had stickers that made them look high-tech. You could strut down the sidewalk, mini boombox on your hip, headphones plugged in, until the batteries died an hour later. And that was the end of that. So yes, it flopped. But it flopped with style. And if you thought that was noisy, wait until we revisit the school supply that became an auditory menace in classrooms across America. The Velcro symphony known as the Trapper Keeper. The electric Egg Poacher was the quiet champion of a better breakfast. Small, unassuming, and often overlooked, it sat tucked away in the corners of countertops, promising soft whites and warm yolks without a pot or pan in sight. You filled the base with water, cracked your eggs into the holders, and watched the steam rise slowly into a gentle cloud. It was perfect for those who wanted elegance without the effort. No vinegar, no swirling water, no chance of a ruined yolk. Just press the button and walk away. In a world full of toasters and coffee makers, it whispered, "Take your time." It belonged to the kind of home that played soft jazz on Sunday mornings and served breakfast on ceramic plates instead of paper towels. The Poacher did not need to be flashy. It was consistent. It gave people back their mornings. And yet, it faded. Because poached eggs stopped being everyday meals. Because we forgot how nice it was to feel fancy before 9 in the morning. Now, most sit in thrift shops, unused and unappreciated. But for those who remember, one bite of that perfectly poached egg takes them straight back. When did we decide breakfast was no longer worth slowing down for? Playgrounds used to be a little more dangerous, and the metal slide on asphalt was the crown jewel of poor design. In the 1970s, nearly every school or park had one. It stood tall, often 2 stories high, baking in the sun until it could sear the back of your legs. No shade, no padding. Just you, gravity, and a prayer. The steps up were made of thin metal bars. The top had no real guardrails, and when you slid down, you hit that blacktop like a dropped steak. But we lined up for it anyway, over and over. There was something thrilling about the danger. It was a rite of passage, a fast, hot, jolting ride that ended in a dusty scrape or bruised elbow. Teachers watched from afar. Parents shrugged. Kids were expected to bounce back. If you made it to the bottom without a scream, you earned bragging rights. If you got burned, you wore it like a badge. Safety standards have come a long way since then, but so much of that fearless, feral childhood play was tied to moments like these. Today, it is hard to believe we once thought that was normal, but deep down, part of us misses it. The county auction barn was chaotic, dusty, and loud, and Dad loved every minute of it. From the second you stepped inside, it was a sensory overload. Wooden pens clucked with chickens, bleated with goats, and somewhere a sheep was loudly objecting to something. The auctioneer stood on a platform, voice rising and falling like a song only locals understood. He had his bidding number tucked into his shirt pocket and a mental budget that always magically doubled if the right box came along. There were tables of mystery items, rusty tools, mismatched Tupperware, bundles of wire, and once a broken vending machine that Dad swore he could fix. $10? That's a steal, he would whisper, just before being outbid by the same guy who always bid too high. You did not win much. But when Dad did walk out with something, it was like he had climbed Everest. And even when he lost, he laughed all the way home. The auction was not about getting stuff, it was about the thrill. But when he wanted a guaranteed win, all he needed was a firehouse griddle, a bottle of syrup, and a pancake breakfast made by heroes. Ah yes, the keytar, half keyboard, half guitar, and fully committed to stealing the spotlight. In the 1980s, nothing screamed, "I am serious about synth," like strapping a keyboard around your neck and rocking out like you were in a heavy metal band. And for a moment, it worked. Music videos featured them. Pop stars slung them over their shoulders like electric weapons of sound. The design was bold, the colors were wild, and the idea? Genius. It freed keyboardists from the shadows of the stage and let them strut front and center. But here's the thing, it still looked goofy. It was long, awkward, and required a very specific kind of confidence to pull off. If you did not have that swagger, you just looked like you were struggling with a giant broken remote control. And once the synth-pop wave cooled down, so did the excitement. The keytar slid back into its weird niche corner of music history. But hey, at least it tried to make instruments cool. The same cannot be said for what came next, because sometimes all it took to ruin your outfit was a pair of plastic sunglasses shaped like a lightning bolt. If one of these freedoms hit home, share your memory below, tap like, and subscribe so we keep the past alive together.